It was a great week. Before I read the scripture passage for this morning, I want to thank everybody for the warm reception that you gave to our two guest preachers the past 2 weeks as we've been doing this preaching round robin. 2 weeks ago we had Pastor Julie Holly from Cahaba Heights United Methodist Church came in, and I was in Irondale at Irondale UMC that week. And then last week we had Pastor James from St. James UMC also in Irondale. He was here preaching. Thank you guys for welcoming them so warmly. And last Sunday I was in Cahaba Heights. So everybody's back at their home church this weekend. And part of what the effort was to do this was to bring these churches together because we are sister churches nearby one another. And we wanted to have a shared opportunity for an offering. And I'll tell you a little bit about that in just a little bit. But thank you again for being a part of this experiment that we did the past few weeks. I hope you had a lot of fun. I enjoyed visiting some other places, came back with some ideas to bring back here. And I know that when I talked to my colleagues, they appreciated the reception they received from all of you. So thank you. All right, so this passage comes to us from the 18th chapter of Luke. And this is right after Jesus has done the teaching with the rich young ruler, and this is right before the story of Jesus encountering Zacchaeus. So this comes to us in the 35th verse. As he, that is Jesus, approached Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard a crowd going by, he asked what was happening. They told him, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. Then he shouted, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Now those who were in front sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he shouted even more loudly, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus stood still and ordered the man to be brought to him. And when he came near, he asked him, What do you want me to do for you? He said, Lord, let me see again. Jesus said to him, Receive your sight. Your faith has saved you. Immediately he regained his sight and followed him, glorifying God, and all the people, when they saw it, praised God. May God add a blessing to this reading. Amen. Several years ago now, my family and I were having dinner at some friends' house. They were church members, and they had kids about the same age as our kids, and so it was a natural kind of pairing, and we went over there one night and had dinner with them, and as the evenings would typically go back then, the kids finished their meal, asked to be excused, ran off and played, and the grown-ups lingered at the table for another hour or so, just enjoying each other's company. And at some point during the conversation, the chatters shifted to what was going on in each other's workplace. They were asking me some questions about church, and I got to hear more about their professional lives. And one of our hosts, he is a high-ranking senior VP at a national corporation that all of you have heard of. You've probably shopped there before. And he was saying that they had some interesting conversations around the boardroom table because they had a particularly great year financially at this company. And so they wanted to do something to show some appreciation to their employees. And so they began to brainstorm. They said, we've got a healthy amount of money to put toward some sort of program or some sort of incentive or some kind of thing just to say thank you. And so they started spitballing different ideas. The ideas that came out that day, one of them was, wouldn't it be cool if we could take an employee maybe who wins the grand prize and take their whole family to Arizona, and we could get them a hot air balloon ride that just went through the distance of the Grand Canyon, going down, dipping into the Colorado River, going up to the rim again. Wouldn't that be spectacular? And everybody was saying, okay, that's a pretty cool idea. Another person who had to have been one of those baseball guys said, what if we used one of our corporate jets and put the person who wins the prize and one of their guests on the jet, and they could visit every major league ballpark over the course of a season in the company jet? Everybody said, well, that sounds pretty cool. And so they were kind of coming up with these sort of ideas. And after they had done that, they the next step in the process was that they were going to do the same thing, but they were going to get some feedback from some of the employees. They wanted to hear from people that stocked in the back rooms. They wanted to hear from cashiers. They wanted to hear from people in the corporate offices and the high rises. And so they brought some of those folks in, like a focus group, and they said, okay, tell us, if we were to do something, if the company was to do something for you, just to say thank you, you've just really knocked it out of the park this year, what kind of things would you maybe like to see happen? The first suggestion, somebody said, it'd be really nice to have an extra day off this year. Another person said, yeah, I just came off of a kind of a difficult family situation where we had a relative die, and it was really hard to get off of work and to scrape together the resources to fly to a different part of the country for my loved one's funeral. And if we maybe had a special fund or something where when that kind of thing happens, if we could make that possible. And this friend of ours that we were dining with said, honestly, it was kind of humbling. We had come up with these sort of grandiose ideas of what it is that people might want or what would feel really special and unique, and they actually came up with things that were far more, I guess you could say, modest in terms of their suggestions. He said, and it didn't really feel like they weren't dreaming big enough. They were just talking about things that they felt like they really needed versus things that, by comparison, seemed almost frivolous. He said, we learned a lot about being in that boardroom with the upper level executives that day. And maybe we were making some incorrect assumptions. About that same time, I was invited to go on a pastor's trip to Haiti. This was kind of like a reconnaissance trip, if you will. The idea was that a bunch of pastors would be flown down to Port-au-Prince. We would get to visit different ministry mission sites. And then if there were things that we saw that were interesting or appealing to us, we could come home and tell our congregations about that with the hopes that the church would then bring a group down to Port-au-Prince, stay in their massive guest house, and go out every day to do these different mission projects and opportunities. So I was down there with a few other pastors, and we were looking at these different mission sites. And there was something weird. There was just sort of this weird feeling in the guest house that night. It was just sort of a heaviness. And it wasn't from the people who were in town as guests. The heaviness seemed to be on the part of those who were the ones who ran the guest house. These were other Americans who were a part of this ministry who just were living in Port-au-Prince in this guest house meant to host groups coming in and out of the country. So they would prepare the meals, they would provide the transportation, that kind of thing. And there was a heaviness among that staff. And finally I just said, is everything okay? And they said, well, you just got here, but there was a group that just left a few hours before you arrived. And honestly, it was kind of a hard week. I said, well, okay, I guess I'm a pastor, so I asked the question, you want to talk about it? And they said, well, yeah, I guess so. They said, are you familiar with that company? And they named the company, that when they sell a pair of shoes, they also donate a pair of shoes to somebody in need? And I said, yeah, I'm familiar with that company. I said, it seemed like a pretty cool business model. They said, well, we did too. And we invited them to come down here and stay in the guest house. And they were pretty excited about that because they had been compiling all of these giveaway shoes in one of their warehouses, and they started shipping them down here. And we would receive them at the port, we'd bring them in, we had all these shoes. And then we rented these massive trucks, these big flatbed trucks. And so we designated what was the most impoverished community in Port-au-Prince, which is saying something. And they said, we're going to go into that neighborhood. We've got these pallets filled with boxes of these shoes. And so we went into the neighborhood the designated day. And he said it was really cool because we had all of these people from that company had flown down, a bunch of their folks, to do this shoe giveaway. So we're driving through this neighborhood and we start handing out shoes. And it becomes like this spontaneous parade that erupts, right? Everybody sort of comes out of their houses and pours into the streets, and we start giving away shoes. And many said it turned kind of ugly. People were fighting over shoes. People got trampled. And it was pretty awful, and we had to get out of there quickly because it quickly became a pretty catastrophic situation. He said, and what's more, we've just learned now, a couple of days after the fact, that there was a group of women, mostly older widows, and their livelihood was based on taking old car tires and truck tires, and they would chop them up into smaller pieces with machetes, and those became the footbed or the soles for shoes that they made with strips of canvas and fabric and another cloth, and they would sew together these homemade shoes made out of these old tires. And he said, and now that everybody in the neighborhood has a brand new pair of shoes, we've essentially put them out of business for at least a year. So we just didn't anticipate any of that happening. So pardon the heaviness, but we're still kind of reeling from what we experienced. I share these stories because they have that common theme of what happens when we make assumptions about somebody else and what their needs are. This passage from Luke is one of those texts in the Bible that I think is one of those ones that you probably picked up on by now if you come here regularly, but I love texts like this because there are little diamonds in the rough, or there's a little nugget, or there's something that's just lying beneath the surface that you might not see if you read over it pretty quickly. So let me recap the story for you. Jesus and probably a few of his disciples, they've gotten along with their ministry. After all, we're in chapter 18 of Luke. So Jesus is becoming something of a known entity. He's going from town to town and village to village and making his way across Galilee, and he's made a trip or two to Jerusalem. And now he has gone down this deep road to the bottom of the earth, really, to the city of Jericho, which lies just on the north side of the Dead Sea. The oldest city in the world, the lowest city in the world, still in existence today, as a West Bank city in the same spot it's always been in. And Jesus makes his way down this road. Today there's a wall around the city of Jericho. It doesn't look like it did back in Jesus' time, but there's still a wall around the city. And in Jesus' time it was not unusual, of course, for cities to have walls or fortification around them, which meant that there was probably one primary access point by which people entered and departed from the city. And because of that, the city gates became a hub of information and fellowship and just people gathering together. So sometimes disputes were settled at the city gates, where a mediator would come down and help people work things out. People who were coming in as merchants and artisans, they'd come through the city gates and peddle their wares. Information was exchanged because people would be coming from faraway places and they'd share current events and pass word along. And so the city gates were just like, almost like a town square kind of place, because that's where everything came into or went out of the city. It's also where people who were struggling would congregate and ask for financial assistance from passersby. If there was money was out and being exchanged, then that was a good place to do some panhandling. So we hear about this man in the story today, a man who was born blind, and in Mark's gospel, I believe, we learn that his name is Bartimaeus. Luke doesn't share that, but we'll just call him Bartimaeus for the sake of simplicity. So Bartimaeus is there. He's probably been panhandling for most of his life. Because of his visual impairment, he's probably not been able to hold steady employment. He may or may not have a family that he receives some assistance or care from. And so he is fully dependent, probably, in all likelihood, of sitting at the city gates and just begging for anybody who comes by. But he's also pretty perceptive. And he's also an excellent listener, because he senses just from the rumble of the crowd and the chatter that's going on that this Jesus person is coming near. And because he's at the city gates and because he's privy to current events and information exchange, he has already heard about this Jesus person. And he's heard about the miracles, because even in Jesus' time, word like that travels fast. So as the crowd gathers and then as the noise is building and he can hear the shuffling of feet and he knows that Jesus is passing by at this time, he shouts out, probably in some degree of desperation, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Now I think at this point, and I may be embellishing on the text here, Jesus stops and listens. Because I don't think Jesus is accustomed to being called out to in that way. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. I mean, most people have not addressed Jesus this way. Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus, whoever you are, sir, rabbi, teacher, these are the things that Jesus is called. But Jesus, Son of David, that's distinctive. And what it leads us to believe is that this person already had some sense about not just who Jesus was based on his reputation, but who Jesus was in terms of his relationship to God. And Bartimaeus spoke not just out of his own personal need, but out of a place of faith. You see, one of the things that happens so often when Jesus is performing these miracles or he's doing a teaching is people will come to him and they'll say, "Well, if you can help me, help me. You know, could you fix me? Could you heal me? Could you make things right? Could you forgive me?" And Jesus will always say to them, "Your faith has made you well." But this person, by saying, "Jesus, Son of David," it's already as if Bartimaeus has the faith already. So Jesus is arrested in his tracks. He looks back and he says, "Who said that?" Because Jesus hears it too. And everybody's kind of pausing. And Jesus sometimes in these miracle moments, he says it with a sternness that almost portrays some sort of anger. "Who said that?" And everybody probably was like, "Him." And he says, "Bring him to me." Ooh, right? So they go grab Bartimaeus, they pick him up, and they bring him to the front. And he says, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Here's the diamond in the rough. Here's the nugget we overlook. Jesus says to Bartimaeus, "What is it that you want me to do for you?" What is it that you want me to do for you? Now, the good people of Jericho probably are thinking, "Duh. We know what he needs. This man is begging. This man is visually impaired. This man has been like this his whole life. It's pretty clear what he wants you to do for him." But Jesus knows better. Because Jesus does not make any assumptions about what Bartimaeus' need actually is. Jesus shows him the dignity of asking him, "What is it that you want me to do for you?" We don't know. Maybe he is in excruciating pain in some joint in his body, and that is the more pressing concern. Maybe he suffers from years and years of pent-up grief that has never been resolved, and it continues to plague him and haunt him day after day. Maybe he is deeply depressed. Maybe his heart has been broken. Maybe he has questions about his faith that are unresolved. Maybe it's a theological issue because there's probably people that have said to him, incorrectly by the way, that you must have sinned or your parents sinned, and that is why you've been afflicted with blindness. He could have said anything, and as it happens, he does say, "I'd like to be able to see." And Jesus says, "Fine, then you are healed." But I don't think that Luke includes that question, "What is it that you want me to do for you?" if that isn't an absolutely essential thing in terms of A, showing Bartimaeus his worth and human dignity by honoring him with a question, but also something that we, the church, might glean from this passage. We're probably inclined to read the story quickly, be wowed by another one of Jesus' miracles, and somebody's healed, and he goes skipping away, telling about what good has happened. But the truth of the matter is, for most of us, I think the thing that we can emulate in this story is what Jesus asks of Bartimaeus, not what Jesus actually does for Bartimaeus. I think we would have a troublingly long list if we ever recorded all of the times the church, with very good intentions, and I'm talking about the church universal, but the church with very good intentions made assumptions about what people needed and went ahead and did those without addressing potentially a root problem or a bigger problem. Those kinds of moments can be very humbling for all of us. I think about even last year when we reached out to the primary school over in Leeds at Christmas time and said, we'd like to help out. Can we provide some angel tree gifts for the kids in the school who may not be receiving anything or much of anything this year for Christmas? And they responded well, and it was wonderful, and you all, stepped up and did an incredible job, as you've done with the school supply drive. But part of what I wanted to do in those conversations that we were able to establish early on was we wanted to be available as a church community to help out in other ways if there were other things that should arise. And I think that was one of the moments when we got it right and we said, what is it that we can do for you? Now, we might have continued in the new year to flood them with clothes, with other items that we would deem necessities, toiletries and whatnot. But the first call that came in was for box springs and mattresses. Because there was a family, and you may remember I said, there's a need. I'm not going to go into detail, but there's a need. And y'all stepped up, and several $1,000s came in that one Sunday, and we were able to provide home furnishings for a family that had to relocate immediately because the house that they were renting was so infested with bed bugs from the previous owners that there was no way that they could take anything out of that house and move it to a new residence. And you all responded by giving generously, and we provided for that family in a way that probably wouldn't have occurred to any of us. But because we asked the question, the right thing happened. There are so many times when we make assumptions, almost always with the best intentions at heart. But so often what we find out is that the greater gift that we can offer, the path of dignity, is to ask, what is it that I can do for you? Now, I've shared this message the past 2 weeks at the other 2 churches that I visited because I said, if we truly live into what we're supposed to be doing as the United Methodist Church, that is, we are connectional and we have sibling congregations throughout the city, throughout the state, throughout the country, throughout the world, then we should really be banding together and we could be doing so much more than we can do on our own. I mean, we can put on a wonderful school supply drive, and it's great, and it's going to make a difference, and I'm glad we can do that. But think of what we can do if 4 churches do school supply drives, or 600 churches do school supply drives, or if across the country we do that. And some of the things that we've been able to do in the United Methodist Church is we've been able to start colleges and universities, Birmingham Southern, Huntingdon College, and I learned this last week that even the history of Auburn University had United Methodists at the beginning phases. We have hospitals. I'm a product of somebody who was born healthy in a Methodist hospital. We have camps. We have feeding programs. We did Nothing But Nets and Imagine No Malaria, where we sought to eradicate malaria in sub-Saharan Africa, and we largely did that, which was an incredible feat. And we did that because we came together, but we asked, what is it that we can do for you? And next Sunday, the special offering that I mentioned earlier is going to go to the United Methodist Committee on Relief, aka UMCOR. And UMCOR does one special offering each year called UMCOR Sunday. It used to be called One Great Hour of Sharing. And the idea is that if churches take one special offering a year, which we are doing with Cahaba Heights and St. James and Irondale UMCs, and if we do that once a year, then all the money that comes in that year will pay for the administrative costs and the overhead for that ministry. So that when there's an earthquake, when there's a hurricane, when there's a tsunami, when there's a wildfire, or when there's a human disaster, all of the money that we collect for those disasters, every penny goes toward those in need. Sometimes nonprofits get dinged for, well, yeah, but 30% of it went to overhead. And that's maybe the cost of doing business. But UMCOR's model is we'll do a special offering for the overhead, and then every dollar after that goes toward those who are personally impacted and affected by the disaster. So next Sunday, as our communion offering, we'll do that UMCOR special once-a-year offering. I'm not saying we won't give to UMCOR again, but if we do again this year, it will be because we want to respond to a disaster. So I invite you to give generously. And I invite you to remember that we are doing this with 3 other sister churches, and we'll share the results with you because this is a way for us to come together in this connection, joining together, reaching out to our neighbors and our communities, but first asking, what is it that we can do for you? Will you pray with me?